put it in a funny way though.
Yeah. So if I
We know
if I
you're a
don't-
funny guy.
If I don't know God, for example, right, and I overhear this podcast, someone's listening to it out loud at McDonald's or wherever it is, and these guys are talking about love, love, love this, love that, love that. I'm like, what are you talking about? Is this just a feeling
that
you have? And, you're talking about saturation. What does that even mean? Like,
you're right.
Using these words that I might not be familiar with, and so I'm trying to break it down even more. For
I got you. But I mean, in that case, I mean, this will likely, if somebody's at that place listening to this, I mean, it's probably just going to be a seed. If they're in that place.
Seed.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit will reveal that to you. But no, I really feel like if somebody's in that place, like, yeah, and they're hearing this, it'll be a seed. And like if somebody, like your friend, in that position, it's like the Lord has to get them. They have to get, things got to get dark enough. It's kind of like an unfortunate reality. I don't think that's for everyone, but like most stories that I hear, especially that tend to be like people who are really against it, tends to be something radical. And I would say I had a pretty radical turnaround. Not like, I was like bump God or anything, but in my heart, I was living like God wasn't real. I mean, I would never blaspheme him or anything. I was raised Catholic, and I believe like I would still get convictions, not knowing what they were, but I didn't have that relationship with him. So I just thought he was a God that's like, don't disrespect him, but like, you're not gonna do nothing to me, So I really feel like things got to get dark enough first, and once they're in that place, then there's a decision to be made. Like, are you gonna answer the call when he calls? And because he's the one that makes it all happen. The author and perfecter of our faith. So it's just up to God.
For people who don't know, it was a question I thought was a really interesting exercise, because there are people who say, God's not real, or I don't need God, or whatever. I'm a good person. I'm going to go to heaven, whatever. I think an interesting question to genuinely ask yourself is, if everything, and I think it's good for a lot, if not all people, if everything was frozen for 24 hours and you could get away with doing whatever you wanted for that time period with no consequences afterward, what would you do? Genuinely think about that. I've thought about that question and been like, dang, like that's
a good question.
Yeah, because this whole, like, sin, people think sin is just doing something wrong or doing something that displeases God. Yes, but it's also more. Sin is something that, it's like a cancer we're born with that can only be removed by God's holiness. If God's holiness is the standard, then it's impossible for anyone to meet it, because it doesn't take root. You don't become a sinner once you've done something. It's before that. Something that Jesus preached, one of his most famous messages was, you've heard it said to you, don't murder. But I'm telling you that anyone who gets angry in his heart or gets towards one of his brothers has already committed the act. Have you been angry at anybody before? You've heard it said, don't look at anyone. You've heard it said, anybody who commits adultery or like pretty much sex outside the confines of marriage is liable for judgment in hell, death eternally. But I'm telling you, if you look at anyone with lustful intent, you've already committed the act. Basically, what Jesus is saying is every person on the planet is on the same playing field, no matter whether you know Jesus or not. You're on the same playing field. You have no power in your you have no power in your salvation, your ability to quote unquote get to heaven or be in God's presence, which is really, there's no heaven without God's presence. But so what I'm trying to get at is, without God, we all know we are bad people. I hope we all know. If you don't think you are, then honestly, you're just prideful and arrogant. Like like you may do good things, but sin is an inward thing. And the only way to remove that is outside of us. It's beyond us. It can only be done through Christ, his righteousness, him pretty much elevating us to meet the standard of God's holiness by placing his stamp of approval on us. That's my answer to that question.
Yeah.